Alien sister cried for food. Her older sister struck a deal with a human to keep her alive. Nema knew Veila was awake from the way her younger sister's scales trembled against her side, faint and uneven under the chill of Nexus Station's artificial night. They huddled in the gap between two abandoned cargo containers, wrapped in a ragged thermal sheet that smelled of metal and recycled air. Beyond their little nest, the distant hum of the station's core reactor vibrated through the floor, a constant reminder that life elsewhere on Nexus kept moving, bright and busy and far away from this forgotten edge. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. "I'm so hungry, Nema," Veila whispered. Her voice was thin, as if even talking cost energy. The luminous blue patterns in her scales had dimmed to a washed-out gray, and her large almond-shaped eyes looked too big for her face. At 14 cycles, she should have been in the middle of a growth spurt, not shrinking into herself. Nema, 22 cycles and tired all the way in her bones, brushed her sister's head crest, smoothing down the frayed edges. "I know, little star. Tomorrow will be better. I promise." The promise tasted like ash, but she said it anyway. On Nexus Station, promises were all refugees could afford to give. They had arrived from Valera's Prime 2 years earlier, fleeing a planet tearing itself apart over its last drinkable water. Their parents had traded everything, savings, heirlooms, future dreams, for 2 seats on a refugee transport. "You'll go first," their mother had said, pressing a carved stone into Veila's hand. "We'll follow when things are stable." The message feeds had gone silent 6 months later. The Confederation's grand experiments always looked better on posters than in the lives they broke. At first, Nexus had almost kept its promises. Nema took any job she could get, cleaning waste reclamation tanks, sorting toxic recyclables, patching hull breaches in vacuum suits that leaked if she breathed wrong. The pay was terrible, but it bought ration chips and kept Veila's stomach from aching too loudly. Then the trade disputes with the Xander Empire hit, and the station's economy shuddered. Work vanished. Valerian's need not apply never showed up on a holo sign, but Nema read it every time a recruiter looked past her and moved on to another species. "We could try the community kitchen again," Veila suggested, exhaustion wrapped in fragile hope. "Maybe they won't check IDs this time." "They've started scanning citizenship tags at the door," Nema said quietly. "Refugees are getting turned away." The kitchens were supposed to be proof that the Galactic Confederation cared. Now, they were just another locked door. Veila hesitated. "What about Trell? He liked you. Maybe he'd help." "Trell's shop is sealed," Nema answered, jaw tightening. "Health code violations, officially." Unofficially, rumors said he'd been punished for feeding undesirables like them. The station always found a reason when kindness became inconvenient. Silence rolled in, thick and heavy. Above them, the fall stars shimmered on the simulated sky and the habitat ring, a pretty ceiling for people who could afford to live under it. Nema watched Veila curl up tighter, thin arms wrapped around her middle. Every slow, uneven breath clawed at Nema's thoughts. This couldn't continue. Veila needed nutrition, medical scans, a stable sleep cycle. Instead, she got cold metal and empty promises. There was one path Nema had always refused to take, one she had judged others for even considering. On the lower levels, past the zones patrolled by Confederation security drones, an unlisted economy thrived. Plenty of species offered cultural companionship to humans, the newest arrivals to galactic space, and, somehow, already among the richest. Humans wanted alien translators, personal assistants, cultural guides, and, sometimes, something far more personal. The official files called them exchange programs. The station gossip called them by uglier names. Nema had turned the intermediaries away each time they'd approached her. "Valerian scales are very fashionable with humans," one had purred. "You'd never have to worry about food again." She had clung to the pride her parents taught her. Your body is not a currency. But pride did not keep Veila's eyes from sinking deeper into her face. Morning came like it always did on Nexus, with the overhead panels shifting gradually from darkness to a soft dawn glow. Nema hadn't slept. She watched every color change on the ceiling, fighting her own decision until there was nothing left but the reality of Veila's labored breathing. Nema, Veila rasped as the light brightened. It hurts. Inside. That was the moment something in Nema snapped into place. Pride was important. Veila staying alive was more important. I'm going to fix this today, Nema said, helping her sister sit up. I swear it, little star. Ow! Veila's head crest fluttered weakly, torn between hope and fear. I'm going to talk to someone, Nema said, choosing her words carefully. There's a program. Humans looking for cultural guides. Maybe they still have openings. She forced a reassuring smile. You'll stay here. Stay small, stay quiet, just like we practiced. Veila's grip tightened on the carved stone hanging at her neck. You'll come back before night cycle, right? Before the lights dim, Nema promised. She tucked the thermal sheet around Veila, arranged their few belongings. Data crystal with family images, the emergency communicator, the chipped food containers, in a way that made their little den look more secure than it was. Then she turned and slipped into the maze of service corridors. The maintenance tunnels were the station's real veins, hidden behind polished public walkways and diplomatic districts. Refugees, undocumented workers, smugglers, everyone used them to avoid ID scans and awkward questions. Nema moved quickly, her scales instinctively shifting tone to match the gloom-gray walls, a Valyrian adaptation that had once helped them hide among coral forests back on Valera's Prime. Her destination glowed at the center of her mental map. Level 42, Section B, officially, Diplomatic Residential Zone, Human Mission. Unofficially, the Human District, a slice of Earth-style luxury carved out of the station's ring. The shift from tunnels to Level 42 was violent. 1 second she was surrounded by exposed cables and the smell of lubricant. The next she stepped into wide, bright corridors lined with imported plant from half a dozen worlds. Holographic sky arched overhead, complete with drifting clouds and simulated birds. The air tasted overly clean, filtered and perfumed until it almost felt fake. One day's climate control in this ring could have powered an entire refugee sector for a month. Nema kept her gaze down, relying on her worn gray jumpsuit to help her pass as maintenance staff. Her thin frame and translucent head crest still marked her as a Valyrian, but most people here never really looked at workers' faces. The office she was searching for looked boring on purpose, a simple door wedge between 2 gleaming residential towers. A sign in Confederation standard pictograms read, Interspecies Cultural Exchange Initiative. Nice official safe. Everyone knew it was a human, alien matchmaking service. Nema's hand shook as she pressed her palm to the access pad. The lock chirped acceptance. The door slid open with a whisper. Inside, the reception area was softened with comfortable chairs and soothing colors designed to lower pulse rates. Behind a curved desk sat a Phylaxian, their 4 arms moving in precise coordination over multiple holographic displays. Their polished exoskeleton caught the light like lacquered armor. Welcome to the Interspecies Cultural Exchange Initiative, they said in perfectly modulated standard. How may we facilitate understanding today? I heard there might be opportunities for Valyrians, Nema said, forcing her voice not to shake. With humans. Cultural exchange roles. The Phylaxian watched her with compound eyes that missed nothing. Her 2 thin shoulders, the worn jumpsuit, the desperation she was trying to hide. One pair of hands swept displays aside. Another gestured toward an inner door. Of course, they said smoothly. We are always looking for ambassadors for Valera's Prime. Please, come with me. I am Coordinator Zix. We'll talk about possible placements. The consultation room smelled faintly of citrus and something sweet. Real fruit and protein cubes sat on a side table. Nema's stomach clenched so hard she almost folded over. Please, help yourself, Zix said, noticing without commenting. These things take time. Nema forced herself to take only a couple of cubes and eat them slowly, as if she weren't devouring the first real food she'd had in days. Zix pretended not to notice. So, they began, settling into a multi-limbed chair. Name and experience? Nema, she said, leaving off her family name. I've been on Nexus for 2 years. I've worked in maintenance, waste reclamation, outer hull repairs. Whatever I could find. Strong technical background, Zix observed, antennae twitching. Humans usually prefer candidates with social skills, negotiation, hospitality, conversation. Experience with humans? I've watched them, Nema said, and spoken to some on maintenance shifts. I know they find Valyrian bioluminescence interesting. Her scales darkened with embarrassment. True, Zix said. Humans are very curious about Valyrian color shifts. More displays floated into view. As it happens, there is a human client looking for a long-term cultural ambassador. Marcus Hayes, new to Nexus, senior rank in the Earth Diplomatic Corps. Significant residence on level 42. He specifically requested someone intelligent, adaptable, with real cultural insight, not just decoration. A tiny flame of hope flickered in Nema's chest. It frightened her more than the hunger. What would he expect? She asked. Exactly. Companionship, Zix replied. Attendance at functions, private dinners, cultural explanation, conversation. Some clients develop closer relationships over time, but nothing is forced. We screen for basic respect. You could terminate the arrangement if it became unsafe. Nema thought of Veila curled around her aching stomach. Of the empty communicator channels to Valera's Prime. Of being tired, hungry, and invisible for the rest of her life. Her options weren't really options at all. When can I meet him? She asked. Today, Zix said. 1500 station time. If both of you agree, you could move in immediately. And medical coverage? Nema asked, pulse spiking. For family. That is not standard, Zix replied slowly. You have dependents? A younger sister. 14 cycles. She's all I have. I can't leave her. Zix studied her again, antennae angled in thought. This complicates things. Humans expect discretion. But Marcus' file shows no objection to dependents marked. Large residence. Might be negotiable. I suggest not leading with that detail. Establish rapport first. It felt like a small betrayal, but Nema nodded. Survival had already taught her too much about half-truths. Zix slid a credit chip across the table. An advance for grooming and appropriate attire. Presenting well increases your chances. There's a multi-species salon 3 levels down. They'll know what to do. Nema understood the kindness hidden inside the business-like tone. Thank you, she said quietly. Professional investment, Zix replied briskly. See you at 1500, Nema of Valera's Prime. The chip in her hand felt heavier than it should. Heavier than pride, heavier than fear. It felt like a door creaking open. First, food for Veila. Then the salon. Then the human. By the time Nema returned to their hiding spot, the scent of real food preceded her. Veila's nostrils flared. Her eyes fluttered open. Nema, she croaked. I'm here, little star, Nema said, sinking to her knees beside her. Look, she opened the containers, letting the steam curl into the cold air. Protein cubes, sliced fruit, even a small tub of glossy dessert gel. Veila's scales brightened a shade, the first spark of color Nema had seen in days. How did you? I found work. The words were technically true. Eat slowly. Your stomach needs time to remember how to be happy. Watching Veila chew, watching color seep gradually back into her sister's skin, Nema felt her resolve harden. If she had to stand in a room and let a human examine her like an exotic artifact, to keep this happening every day, she would. When Veila had eaten enough to regain some strength without making herself sick, Nema explained the rest. I have to go out again, she said. There's a meeting for the job. Important one. Can I come? Veila asked, already dreading another long wait alone. Nema hesitated. Bringing her into the polished part of level 42 was risky. But leaving her in this shadowed storage maze with nothing but a blanket and worry was worse. You can come as far as the grooming place, Nema decided. After that, you'll wait in a garden near the office. Safe watched, but not obvious. That way I can find you fast if it goes well. Veila clutched the carved stone at her chest and nodded. Okay. The salon Zix had recommended was built into a side corridor off a moderately wealthy ring. Not as stunning as level 42, but light years from the cargo graveyard they'd slept in. A soft chime announced their entry. Inside, scented mist drifted across climate-controlled air. Holographic before and after images flickered on the walls. Dull scales to shining, tangled fur to silky, faded crest feathers to radiant plumes. The staff barely reacted to Nema's jumpsuit and Veila's thin frame. They had seen worse. When Nema handed over the credit chip, a multi-armed technician scanned it and smiled without surprise at the balance. "Coordinator Zix sent you," they said. "We'll take care of you." The process took longer than Nema expected. Warm solutions soaked away weeks of grime from her scales. Nutrient gels massaged and her crest restored its natural lift. Her nails and teeth were cleaned and polished to a healthy sheen. Tailors scanned her body, then produced a flowing garment in a cool, oceanic tone that echoed old Valeris seas. Modest, elegant, professional. Someone had done their cultural research. When she finally stepped out, Veila stared in open awe. "You look like Mama," she whispered. Nema's throat tightened. Their mother had always moved like the ocean she loved, colors shifting across her scales with every emotion. For a second, Nema saw the reflection the way Veila did. A young Valyrian standing tall, scales shimmering blue-green, head crest lifted, eyes alert instead of defeated. "Then they did a good job," Nema said, forcing a smile. "Come on, we're going to level 42. The human district looked different when she wasn't sneaking through it in a borrowed jumpsuit. Security glanced at her, registered her polished appearance and neutral expression, then looked away. Appearances mattered here. For once, they worked in her favor. She settled Veila on a bench half hidden by imported shrubs in a small public garden near the Cultural Exchange Office. Discreet surveillance, nodes glittered faintly in the branches. "Stay here," Nema said softly. "If anything feels wrong, go to the crowd by the cafe over there and call me on the communicator. Same emergency code as always." "Okay." "My hatching day," Veila said, offended she could forget. "I remember. I'll be back before the lights go dim," Nema promised. Inside, Coordinator Zix surveyed her with obvious satisfaction. "Much better," they said. Humans respond strongly to presentation. "Mr. Hayes has arrived and is waiting in the introduction lounge. This is just a first meeting. You can walk away if you choose." "So can he?" Nema swallowed against the dryness in her mouth. "Understood." At the lounge door, Zix paused. "One last suggestion. Humans value authenticity. They can sense when someone is saying what they think they're supposed to say. Be honest about your strengths and your boundaries. Desperation repels. Quiet dignity attracts." "I'll try," Nema murmured. Zix opened the door. "Mr. Hayes, may I present Nema of Valeris Prime." The human who stood to greet her did not match the loud, arrogant figures from station gossip. Marcus Hayes was taller than her, with dark brown skin, close-cropped hair tipped with gray at the temples, and eyes that looked like they missed very little. His Navy uniform carried the understated lines of Earth's diplomatic corps, insignia glinting at his collar. "Thank you, Coordinator," he said in a deep, steady voice. He turned to Nema and extended his hand in the human greeting she'd seen 100 times but never shared. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Nema of Valeris Prime." She hesitated just long enough to remember Zix's advice, then placed her hand in his. Human skin was warmer than Valyrian, dense with heat and blood. His grip was firm but not crushing. "The pleasure is mine." "Marcus," she said carefully. When Zix withdrew and the door slid shut, the room seemed suddenly bigger. Marcus gestured to a low-seating arrangement designed for multiple species. "Please sit," he said. He took the opposite chair, leaving space between them. "I understand you've been on Nexus Station for some time," he began. 2 years, Nema confirmed. "We arrived during the 3rd expansion phase." Her mouth moved before she could stop it. "My sister and I." Marcus' gaze sharpened almost imperceptibly at the last detail, but he didn't press it. "Before that, Valeris Prime," he said. It wasn't a question. Nema nodded. "We left during the resource wars. Our parents stayed behind to finalize travel papers." Her voice thinned on the last word. "We never heard from them again." Marcus' jaw tightened. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. The Confederation's handling of the Valeris crisis was deeply flawed. Most officials avoided that kind of language. They said regrettable outcome or unavoidable instability. Hearing a human diplomat call it flawed felt like stepping into slightly different gravity. Everything tilted. "You know a lot about refugees," she said. "It's my job," he replied with a shrug that wasn't casual at all. "Earth sent me here as a liaison on humanitarian issues, displaced populations, aid distribution, that sort of thing. To be useful, I need someone who understands Nexus beyond the briefing files. Someone like you." "You specifically requested a Valyrian," Nema said. "Why?" "Valyrians have a reputation for adaptability and for staying neutral in conflicts," Marcus answered. "And there are many Valyrian refugees on Nexus now. If I can understand your community, I can understand the structural failures of Confederation relief." He met her gaze directly. "Your lived experience is not a footnote, Nema. It's expertise." The words slid under her skin like warmth, dangerous and tempting. She forced herself to focus. "What exactly would I do in this role?" she asked. "I need to be clear." He inclined his head, as if respecting the question. "Officially, you'd be my cultural attaché. You'd attend receptions, brief me on the nuances of different species' customs and politics, help me navigate the station's unofficial networks. You'd also advise on humanitarian initiatives and accompany me on field visits to the lower sectors." Unofficially, he hesitated. "I'd like company that isn't filtered through 3 layers of political training. Someone who will tell me when I'm missing something important." "And the private expectations?" Nema asked, bracing herself. "There are none beyond conversation," Marcus said firmly. "You'd have your own room, complete control over your time off duty, and the right to leave the arrangement with notice if you feel unsafe or uncomfortable. I'm aware of the reputation some of these placements have. This is not that." Her shoulders loosened a fraction. "The coordinator said the position includes medical coverage and housing." "Yes," Marcus confirmed. "Private quarters in my residence, full medical access, a stipend, and protected diplomatic status. You'd be legally under Earth's humanitarian program." He paused. "This is a lot to absorb. Take your time." Nema drew breath, feeling the weight of something bigger than her own hunger settling over the moment. She could not pretend this was just about her. "If we agree," she said, "you need to know, I have a younger sister, Veila, 14 cycles. She depends on me entirely. I will not leave her behind." Marcus did not flinch. He considered this for a moment instead of reacting immediately. "Is she safe right now?" he asked. "As safe as anyone without a registered address can be," Nema answered. "My residence has 3 rooms," he said, "designed for staff or security. Your sister would be welcome in the 3rd room, under the same protections you'd receive." The world wobbled. Nema had expected negotiation, maybe conditions, maybe outright refusal. Not simple acceptance. "You would do that?" she asked. "It makes sense," he said. "Family bonds usually create more stability than they disrupt. And no child should be left in a cargo alley while their guardian attends diplomatic events." For a heartbeat, Nema couldn't speak. The desperation she'd been trying to bury rose up, hot and thick. "I would like to accept," she said finally, choosing her words carefully, "on the condition that either of us can end the arrangement with notice." "Agreed," Marcus said at once. "We can consider the first 2 weeks a trial period. If at any point you decide it's not working, you can walk away, no penalties." He stood and offered his hand again. "If you're ready, you can collect your sister and belongings. My residence is in Section D, Suite 47. This card will get you in. I'll be in meetings until 1800. That should give you time to settle." The access card felt heavier than the credit chip, heavier than a ration block, heavier even than the carved stone Veila wore. It felt like a key to a different life. "I'll see you then, Marcus," Nema said. When she stepped back into the garden, Veila sprang up from the bench, crest trembling. "Did you get it? Are we leaving?" Nema pulled her into a fierce hug. "We have a home, little star. Real quarters. With beds and a private washroom and food that isn't stale paste." A ripple of brilliant blue shot across Veila's scales, bright enough to make a passerby glance their way. "When?" she demanded. Now, Nema said, and for the first time in years, the word felt like a door opening instead of slamming shut. The residential suite in Section D looked like something from a recruiting holo. The door slid open at Nema's touch, and a rush of cool, clean air washed over them, carrying subtle hints of spices and citrus. The main room opened toward a wide viewport that showed the curve of Nexus Station's central hub and a scatter of distant stars. Soft lights adjusted automatically to their presence, shifting to a spectrum comfortable for Valyrian eyes. For a long moment, neither sister spoke. Veila stepped forward first, tiny claws clicking on the polished floor. "Nema," she breathed, "we're not supposed to be in places like this." "We are now," Nema said, though her own voice sounded uncertain in the quiet. Environmental controls hummed softly in the walls, broadcasting a temperature and humidity that felt strikingly close to Valeris Prime's coastal nights. Someone had programmed the system with care. They explored like ghosts afraid to disturb a dream. Each of the 3 bedrooms held a sleeping platform, a personal sanitation unit with both sonic and water-based cleansing options, and a small workspace. Closets in 2 of the rooms held neatly folded garments sized for a Valyrian frame, flowing tunics in deep ocean tones and neutral shades appropriate for formal events. Veila claimed the smallest bedroom almost immediately, flopping onto the bed with a delighted squeak. "It's soft," she said, burying her face in the covers. "Nema, it's so soft." In her own room, Nema stood before the reflection panel, studying the stranger reflected there. She didn't look like a refugee picking through discarded food containers anymore. She looked like someone meant to stand under bright lights and speak into cameras. The thought scared her and sent a strange thrill up her spine. In the kitchen unit, storage drawers opened to reveal neatly organized nutrient packs, fresh produce from multiple worlds, and labeled containers of prepared meals. A separate section held Valyrian staples Nema hadn't seen since leaving home. Mineral-rich seaweed wafers, trace element gels, spice mixes matched to their biochemistry. "He prepared for us," she thought. Not for some generic guest. For Valyrians. Hours passed. No one came to tell them there had been a mistake. At 1900, the door chimed. Veila darted out of her room and then stopped abruptly as Marcus stepped inside, uniform jacket open, exhaustion softening his posture. "Welcome home," he said, and somehow it didn't sound wrong. "I hope the environmental settings are comfortable." "They're perfect," Nema managed. "Thank you." "And the suite?" he asked. "Anything missing or needing adjustment?" "It's more than we imagined," Nema said honestly. "We're still figuring out how to exist in it." "Take your time." He glanced toward the room, where Veila hovered half-hidden behind the doorway. "You must be Veila." She stiffened. "You know my name," she said cautiously. "Your sister spoke of you," Marcus replied. He kept a respectful distance, not moving closer without invitation. "I hear you're interested in learning. There's a terminal in your room with full access to the Confederation Educational Network. We can talk about enrollment in a structured program tomorrow, if you'd like." Veila's crest lifted. "Real classes? With other students?" "If that's what you want," Marcus said. "Yes," she blurted. "I mean, yes, please." Her scales flared bright blue, then flickered with embarrassment. Marcus smiled. "Good. We'll arrange it." He looked back at Nema. "For tonight, I thought we might keep it simple. We can eat here. There are Valyrian options stocked, and I can prepare something basic from the human side." Dinner felt surreal. Nema and Veila sat at an actual table, not on overturned crates. Marcus moved comfortably between the food dispensers and the cooking surfaces, assembling dishes with the ease of someone who'd been living in space long enough to make synthetic ingredients taste like home. Conversation started small. What spices Veila liked, which foods aggravated Valyrian digestion, what parts of the station Nema considered safest for juveniles. But as the meal went on, Marcus began asking different questions. "What have you noticed most about how resources move through the refugee sectors?" he asked Nema between bites. Not the official route, the real one. The answer poured out of her before she realized the floodgate had opened. "Aid comes in through the main distribution centers," she said, "but a lot gets diverted at the warehouse level. Local administrators take their cut, then gangs take theirs. By the time anything reaches the people it was meant for, it's thin and late and often expired. Some species have specific mineral needs that the generic ration packs don't cover. That's why you're seeing those bone density cases in Valyrian juveniles. Marcus listened instead of interrupting, occasionally asking for clarification. He didn't argue or say yes, but the reports say. He just took notes on a slim device, marking points to follow up on later. Would you be willing to put some of this into a brief? He asked, as they clear the plates. If it's presented in the right way, with your observations and some data layered in, I can use it with the humanitarian committee. Nema blinked. You want me to write policy notes? I want you to tell the truth you've seen, Marcus said. My team can help with formatting. The content has to come from someone who's actually had to line up for broken distribution systems. It was the first time anyone had looked at her and seen more than a pair of hands. In the days that followed, the pattern held. Mornings began with Veila disappearing eagerly into the diplomatic family's education wing, learning side by side with children from half a dozen worlds. Nema's day started with a briefing in Marcus' office, upcoming receptions, meetings with Confederation officials, visits to sectors 18 to 23 where aid centers were faltering. At their first diplomatic reception, Nema stood at Marcus' side in a formal tunic, the lights of the Confederation embassy casting soft highlights across her scales. Representatives from dozens of species drifted through the hall, trading words that sounded polite and smelled like strategy. That Xandarian ambassador has been watching you, she murmured in Valyrian, which Marcus had started to pick up at an impressive pace. He's pretending to talk to the trade minister, but his eyes keep coming back. Ambassador Orcs, Marcus said quietly. Xandarian Empire's primary voice here. They're nervous about Earth's growing influence. A Valyrian refugee at the side of an Earth diplomat sends a message they'll want to decode. So, we are a message, Nema said, tasting the bitter humor of it. Do we get to choose what we say? That's the goal, Marcus replied. You're not a prop, Nema. You're a signal that Earth is listening to people the Confederation sidelines. Throughout the evening, Nema played the part she'd been hired for and the one she'd grown into. She translated not just words but expressions and silences. She reminded Marcus which species found direct, eye-contact aggressive, and which considered it a sign of respect. She eased conversations toward topics that exposed gaps in the Confederation's humanitarian efforts without sounding confrontational. Later, in the transport back to Section D, Marcus looked almost amused. Minister Vrock doesn't usually talk about resource allocations at parties, he said. He wasn't, Nema corrected. His aide was trying to impress me with how generous their trade policies are. The minister joined in to save face. He ended up admitting more than he meant to. Marcus shook his head. You've just given me more actionable intel than 3 official briefings. You really are very good at this. The warmth that rose in Nema's chest had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with recognition. For the first time since Valera's prime, she felt useful in a way that wasn't simply about survival. Over the weeks that followed, the humanitarian briefing she'd written began to ripple outward. The Confederation's supplement program initiated a review of species-specific nutritional requirements. Marcus used her maps of unofficial resource routes to build a case for community-managed distribution centers, smaller hubs run by local representatives instead of distant administrators. When he asked her to help design them, her first reaction was disbelief. I'm not a planner, she protested. I'm just someone who's watched things fail. That's exactly who should be designing better systems, Marcus said. So she sat at the terminal late into the artificial night, drafting proposal outlines and reaching out, carefully, to contacts in the refugee sectors. A Nuven community organizer, a retired engineer from a border world, a former teacher who'd been running an informal school in a storage bay. Together, they shaped a model that acknowledged reality instead of pretending it away. Through it all, the line Marcus had drawn between professional partnership and personal boundary held. They shared meals, jokes, the occasional story about childhood, his on a war-torn Earth colony, hers among coral reefs now probably dry. They did not share a bed. When rumors in the embassy corridors suggested otherwise, Marcus shut them down with a level stare and a formal clarification that left no room for innuendo. 4-2 Valyrian refugees who had once measured their future in ration packs and shelter hours. This new version of life felt impossible. Yet every time Nema watched Veila come home from classes buzzing about math models and cross-species diplomacy, she believed in it a little more. The first Real crack appeared 3 months into their new routine. It arrived in the form of a typed message on Marcus' personal device during a quiet dinner. His expression changed as he read it. Lines deepened around his mouth, and his shoulders tightened. "I'm sorry," he said, rising abruptly. "I need a moment." Nema and Veila exchanged glances as he disappeared into his office. The door slid shut, cutting off the muted sound of his voice on a secure line. "He looks like when you talk about distribution failures," Veila said softly. "Worse," Nema replied. When Marcus emerged half an hour later, he seemed composed again, but the tension hadn't left his eyes. "Earth has recalled me for emergency consultations," he said. "The situation between the Confederation and the Xandarian Empire is getting worse." "Over the Cygnus sector?" Nema asked. She'd been tracking the news. Xandarian ships were edging closer to contested trade routes. "Among other things," Marcus said, "some factions on Earth want a closer alliance with the Confederation. Others want to stay out of any major power conflict. I've been arguing for a position that keeps humanitarian routes open regardless of military decisions. It's not a popular stance with everyone." "When do you leave?" Veila asked, scales paling. "Tomorrow," he said. "First transport." The room seemed to tilt again. Too much had changed too quickly in their lives for the word temporary to feel safe. "What does that mean for us?" Nema asked, keeping her voice level. "For the projects?" "You keep them going," Marcus said immediately. "I've arranged for you to retain full access to this residence and to your role as community liaison. The mission director has signed off. Your work is now formally part of Earth's humanitarian program, not just an attachment to my personal assignment." Nema absorbed this. It sounded good. It also sounded fragile, like everything else held up by politics. "If conflict escalates," she said, "refugees will be the first ones cut off. Aid gets redirected to troops long before anyone admits it." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's why I've set something else up. An independent foundation registered under Earth's law, funded for at least 2 years. It's dedicated solely to supporting the community distribution centers and emergency interventions we've been building. Even if official policies shift, that stream will continue." "You did that for us," Veila blurted. "For everyone the Confederation keeps forgetting," Marcus said. "But yes, you two were part of the reason I pushed it through." He hesitated, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, matte black device with no visible interface. "One more thing. This connects to a secure Earth channel outside standard Confederation traffic. Use it only if you run into something serious, threats, sabotage, anything that feels like more than local corruption. It's not a toy. Understand?" Nema nodded, recognizing the trust in the gesture. The night before his departure, sleep was thin and fractured. In the early morning, they rode together to the diplomatic docking bay. The vast chamber buzzed with activity as personnel and cargo moved toward a sleek Earth transport docked at the outer ring. "I finalized one last bit of paperwork," Marcus said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "You both now have permanent resident status under the Earth Humanitarian Special Designation Program." Nema stared. "Permanent," she repeated. "As in, not refugees anymore." "As in no more temporary IDs," Marcus confirmed. "No more subject to relocation tags. You have rights now that can't be pulled away because some committee changes its mind. It cost a lot of political capital. Worth every bit." Veila's eyes shone. "We're really staying?" "You have a future here that isn't built on borrowed time," Marcus said. "Whatever happens to me, that doesn't change." The boarding announcement called Earth personnel to the ramp. Marcus looked between them, expression softening. "Take care of each other," he said, "and keep pushing. You're doing more good than most of the people giving speeches upstairs." "We'll keep the work going," Nema said. "Come back and see what you started." "That's the plan," he replied. He hesitated for half a heartbeat. then extended his hand in a human farewell gesture. Nema took it. Veila darted in and wrapped her arms around his waist in a quick, fierce hug before darting back, crest flattened in embarrassment. He left with the others, uniform blending into a stream of navy and silver until they couldn't pick him out anymore. They watched from the observation window as the transport undocked, rotated, and slid away into the star-speckled dark. "He'll come back," Veila said, voice small but determined. "He made us permanent. People who do that don't just vanish." "I think he wants to," Nema said softly. "Whether he can is another question." In the months that followed, Nexus Station felt subtly different. Without Marcus at the meetings, some Confederation officials relaxed, assuming Earth's humanitarian pressure had lessened. At the same time, Xandarian representatives expanded their presence in the lower sectors with unnerving speed. They opened their own assistance centers, distributing supplies branded with Imperial symbols. Aid came with pamphlets explaining how the Confederation had failed worlds like Valeris Prime, and how the Xandarian Empire would have handled things better. "They're setting up shop right across from our community hubs," Nema told Marcus through a secure video channel weeks later. His face looked more tired now, the gravity on Earth or the politics or both weighing on him. "They're targeting Valyrians and border world refugees, saying the Confederation abandoned us, and Earth is just another parasite. They're not wrong about the Confederation's failures," Marcus said, "but they're twisting the truth to recruit support." He rubbed his forehead. "Are people responding?" "Some," Nema acknowledged. "When your kids are hungry, you don't ask who printed the logo on the food container. Others are skeptical. They know what happens when big empires move in promising protection." "Keep emphasizing community control," Marcus said. "Make sure people know our centers aren't tied to any military agenda. The Xandarians want dependents, not partners." It didn't take long for the pressure to become personal. Ambassador Torx arrived at the Sector 19 community hub one afternoon, flanked by aides in Imperial uniforms. Nema met them at the entrance, her own scales carefully neutral. "Coordinator Nema," Torx said, voice smooth. "Your operations here are impressive. The Empire appreciates efficient logistics." "We appreciate any support for transparent systems," Nema replied. Torx let his gaze sweep the center. The visible audits, the community volunteers, the signboard listing daily supply levels. "You could accomplish so much more with Imperial backing," he said. "Funds, ships, political protection. We value talent. We reward loyalty." Nema held his gaze. "Our model is built on neutrality and local control. Refugees have been used as political pawns too many times already." "Neutrality," Torx said, scales shifting in a pattern that translated as amused contempt. "There is no neutrality in the coming storms. Choose carefully which side you stand on. Your sister is flourishing, I hear. It would be a shame if instability disrupted her education." Veila appeared then, data tablet clutched to her chest. "Ambassador Torx," she said before Nema could stop her, "I've been modeling distribution patterns from your assistance centers. Did you know the math predicts long-term dependency curves? You give just enough to keep people reliant, not enough to make them independent." "It's interesting." The silence stretched taut. Torx's eyes narrowed, then flicked back to Nema. "Teach her to be careful with her conclusions," he said softly. "The universe is not kind to those who refuse protection." He left with his entourage, but the message remained like a cold draft under a door. "Do you always antagonize empires in public?" Nema asked once he was gone, half exasperated, half proud. "I didn't antagonize," Veila protested. "I just showed him the math. You're the one who says truth matters." "True," Nema admitted. "I just prefer to live long enough to see it do some good." When she reported the encounter to Marcus on their next secure call, his jaw tightened. "That was a threat," he said flatly. "Keep records of every interaction like that. If they escalate, we'll need evidence." "How are things there?" she asked. "Messy," he said, "but there's movement. Some people finally understand that if we don't protect humanitarian corridors now, there won't be any left to argue about later. Your reports are part of the case I'm making." "You always did like difficult missions," Nema said. "Someone has to," he replied. and I have excellent backup. They signed off with the unspoken understanding that nothing was guaranteed. Not his return, not peace, not the survival of their fragile network of community centers. But they also understood something else. They were no longer powerless passengers in other people's decisions. When Marcus finally returned to Nexus Station, he didn't announce it. Nema and Veila were in a planning meeting with community representatives from 3 sectors when a familiar voice came from the doorway. Is this where the real policy gets made? Veila nearly knocked over her chair, scrambling to her feet. Marcus, she yelped, crest flaring bright blue. Nema turned more slowly but felt shock and relief slam into her, just as hard. He looked thinner, a little more worn, but something in his shoulders had relaxed compared to their last calls. Earth signed on to a new framework. He explained later at their kitchen table. The 3 of them reunited over a meal like the hundreds before, and the first all at once. Security cooperation with the Confederation, yes, but also guaranteed humanitarian corridors controlled by neutral oversight. And a dedicated initiative to support community-led models across multiple stations. Your initiative, Nema said. Our initiative, he corrected. Your data, your pilot centers, your testimony. Earth needed more than moral arguments. You gave them proof that this works. Over the next 6 months, the program expanded. The community-managed distribution model Nema had mapped out for Sector 19 spread to neighboring sectors, then to other stations. Local teams adapted the framework to different species' needs, but the core principles remained: transparency, community control, and independence from any single empire's propaganda. Not everyone liked it. Xandarian attempts to undermine the centers continued. Quiet intimidation here, bureaucratic obstruction there. But now, they were operating against structures with legal backing and international eyes watching. It was harder to make people disappear when 6 worlds were reading the same shared reports. Nema's role shifted from local organizer to regional coordinator. She spent her days in meetings, on calls, in crowded rooms that smelled of recycled air and determination. She spoke not as someone begging for scraps, but as someone who knew what effective systems looked like because she had lived through their absence. One day, she stood in front of the Confederation Council chamber, an arc of representatives from dozens of species, their forms silhouetted against the glowing walls, and presented a consolidated report. Charts and holomaps flickered behind her, but it was the stories that held the room. A Nuvan family whose children's health had rebounded when trace mineral supplements finally reached them. A group of unaccompanied juveniles who now had stable housing and access to learning terminals. A Valyrian teenager modeling resource flows so precisely that station engineers had offered her an apprenticeship. The name on the slide for that last one made Nema's voice warm with pride. Veila of Valeris Prime. When questions came, they were sharp but no longer dismissive. Counselors asked how to scale, how to adapt, how to partner, not how to make it all someone else's problem. When the session ended, more than one representative approached her with genuine respect instead of polite indifference. Later that night, back in the suite that was no longer just Marcus' quarters, but their shared home, the 3 of them sat by the viewport. Stars glimmered beyond the curve of the station. Below, the habitat ring-glowed with the soft lights of thousands of lives. Do you ever think about that day by the cargo containers? Veila asked suddenly. When I said my stomach hurt and you said you'd fix it? All the time, Nema said. It's the day I decided I was willing to break the rules I'd built in my head about what I would and wouldn't do to survive. And it led you here, Marcus said quietly, to building something no one else managed to build. Nema considered that. It led me to a door I was terrified to knock on, she said. You opening it the right way did the rest. He huffed a soft laugh. I was just trying not to mess it up. You did more than that, Veila said. You treated us like we mattered. Not as cases or data points or pets. Just people. I saw refugees as numbers for too long, Marcus admitted. It took standing in the distribution line beside you to remember that every displaced unit is someone's little star. Veila's crest fluttered at the old nickname. Well, your math got better, she said. Mine too. She waved her tablet. I'm working on a model that predicts which sectors are most at risk of aid manipulation when tensions spike. Of course you are, Nema said, both fond and exasperated. Promise me you'll eat and sleep between saving the galaxy. I learned from you, Veila reminded her. They fell into a comfortable silence, each wrapped in their own thoughts. Outside, a freighter slid past, lights blinking. Somewhere on the station below, a newly stocked distribution center was closing its doors for the night, volunteers logging inventory with tired satisfaction instead of fear. Nema thought about the path that had brought them here, the hunger that had driven her to level 42, the terror of walking into an office where her body might have become a transaction, the shock of being offered partnership instead. She thought about all the people who hadn't stumbled into a human diplomat with a conscience, and how unfair that randomness was. We can't save everyone, she said softly. No, Marcus agreed. But we can change the rules that decide who gets saved and who gets forgotten. And we can keep telling these stories, Veila added. So people who sit in comfortable places remember what it feels like to be cold and hungry on the edge of the station. Nema smiled faintly. Speaking of stories, she turned her gaze toward you, the imaginary audience beyond the screen, the unseen crowd in the endless digital corridors of the net. If you listen all the way to the end of this sci-fi story about alien refugee sisters, Nexus Station, and a human diplomat who refused to look away, don't forget to let us know what you thought down in the comments. Your feedback, positive or negative, helps shape the next stories we tell and keeps this channel going. If you like emotional space stories about found family, interspecies politics, and humans trying their best in a messy galaxy, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload. I'll leave another video up on the screen that I'm pretty sure you'll enjoy if this one kept you hooked. Big hug across the stars, and see you in the next story.